What is up, everybody? This is Nick from P2W Fantasy here to talk some Week 14 football for this Sunday. So, hoping everybody made their fantasy playoffs, but if not, I think it's good to keep playing, even if you're out of contention for some money. You paid to play in these leagues for the most part there, so why not continue to play? Even for us. So I'm in two dynasty leagues, and within these two dynasty leagues, the toilet bowl actually means a lot for the league. The toilet bowl actually decides the order of the dynasty rookie draft for our league. So, for instance, if you win the toilet bowl, you get the first overall draft. So, two dynasty, actually, it's three. I'm in three dynasty leagues that work out that way. So, if you actually win the toilet bowl, you do get the first overall pick. If you come in second place in two out of three of these leagues, you get the second overall pick. So I like that because it gives people an incentive to keep playing because, again, we got 16 weeks of fantasy football. And if you're out of it, you're not in the top six, top four. It's fun to keep playing. So I do like that. But I wish everybody some luck on this upcoming matchup here. Me myself, I'm a little bit disappointed from last night. Had Robert Woods in almost every single league. I was pushing hard on him, having a good week just because I thought, he's a target monster and he would have that sort of volume. But a lot of people thought, Stephon Gilmore was going to come into play, and I think it was just game script in this one. Jared Goff threw the ball a lot less than he normally does. I mean, he's usually throwing the ball somewhere between 30 to upper 40s sometimes. So throwing the ball in the 20 range, obviously, it was game script. So, like my buddy JB said, Robert Woods, yeah, did have a little bit of a dud, but I think it could have been worse. So I think he had 5 catches on the night. Two were thrown almost at his ankles, so he could have had more. But I wouldn't blame that on Stephon Gilmore. I think it was more on they were smacking the Patriots, and they didn't have to throw the ball a lot. And the other team really couldn't throw the ball at all. So that didn't really help the case for Jared Goff. Cam Akers obviously was the talk of the night, having an explosive game. I'm sure he's climbing everybody's rankings right now. There's talks of him being the best rookie now. You got to be careful with the 1 week analysis, but it is nice to see him get the bulk of the touches there as well. Damian Harris on the other side looks good still, but the Patriots, I think, have to find a way to push the ball a little bit better than they have. Cam struggled, but Bill Belichick actually came out and said Cam's still our guy. So I think that shows you can be a little bit comfortable with Cam moving forward if you're still having to use him maybe in a super flex league. But yeah, so that was a good one to watch, especially if you had the Rams defense, who was probably the best scoring asset of that game, especially if you're in DFS. So what we got ahead here, just going game to game and talking players from each matchups. What we have to look forward to here. And it's an important week for a lot of people. It's the first round of the playoffs. You might have secured a first round bye, but it's important to see what happens with these guys in the games and what sort of trends some players are following right now. So to kick things off, we'll start with the Titans and the Jaguars. So one of the first games of the afternoon tomorrow. James Robinson is the RB4 on the year. Awesome, great year. Got to have some respect for him personally because I'm from Illinois, and he is also from Illinois. He's from Rockford. He went to Illinois State. My wife went to Illinois State. So we have a soft spot here for James Robinson, and seeing him climb up and do what he's doing is awesome right now. He's had 2 straight 22-plus games with a touchdown in both. One thing you can look at with the Tennessee Titans is Nick Chubb lit them up last game. So I think that gives you even more optimism to plug in James Robinson and be very comfortable with him being a top 5 back once again in this week. And I got my buddy D. Mendy checking in. What's up, Mendy? Love people checking in. Derrick Henry, I think is suited up to have a monster bounce back game. He kind of burned people last week on his production because you're used to him scoring somewhere in the top 10. Not a good week for him last week, but I think against the Jaguars, I think both James Robinson and Derrick Henry are obviously guys you're going to play, but also guys that I think you're going to be very comfortable with having good weeks. Corey Davis is an interesting guy. Went 11 catches on 12 targets last week for 182 yards. He had one of the most yards in the league for the week, and had a touchdown last game as well. The last 3 games, he saw 7, 3, and 12 targets. So you're hoping that it's not the case where it's one of those 3 games, but I think against the Jaguars, unless they're really, really game managing that game, I think Corey Davis is a guy that's had a lot of good weeks for you in fantasy. So if you're looking for a guy that's maybe a flex play, I think you're comfortable plugging him in. Agreed. Massive games for both Robinson and King Henry coming. I absolutely agree with that. I think both of those guys can easily be guys that you can put in your top 5 for this week coming up in the same game, which will be interesting to watch. Might be a lot of ground game there. Looking at the Jaguars wide receivers, Chark's coming off of 3 games under 10 points. So he did have some decent targets in those games from Glennon in terms of how many he had, but his production's been kind of off. So I'm a little hesitant here plugging Chark in. I think if you have him, you're looking to play him. He's projected around 13, I think. But not a lot of positivity coming off of his last few games here. I don't know if that's on him. It's probably mostly on Mike Glennon, but he really needs to step it up. So if there's a guy that needs a bounce back, it's definitely DJ Chark. Godfather League, another comment. Keep hustling, Nick. Appreciate that, brother. Colin Johnson's interesting. He's not projected very good, but he's coming off of 2 weeks of having 19.6 and 12.6 over his last 2 games. He's had 8 targets and 6 targets. So if you're looking at dynasty leagues and you're looking at some deeper leagues where you're struggling to find somebody to plug in, Colin Johnson's been pretty good the last 2 weeks. I think he's a guy that's made a name for himself in this offense, and seeing that he's had 8 targets and 6 targets, that's a good sign there. That's more than Laviska Shenault. Shenault had that weird deflection touchdown last game that gave him some fantasy points that made him relevant. But at the same time, Colin Johnson's been very involved in this offense. I think that says a lot about his maybe dynasty managers moving forward. Next game on the slate here, we got the Vikings versus the Buccaneers. Cook had 32 rushes last game for 120 yards. So the number 32 obviously stands out for you. Dalvin Cook is going to get a ton of volume in almost every game. This is a tougher matchup. The Bucs defense obviously have been pretty good against the run, pretty good against almost everything. But Dalvin Cook having that sort of volume, I think you have a good chance of him finding the end zone, finding some big yard plays. So obviously you're comfortable with him, but it's a little bit tougher of a matchup that he's had in recent times, especially with Tampa Bay's run defense. Rojo, on the other hand, on the other side of the ball, 9 carries last game, resulting in a big receiving touchdown and 17.3 points. So he didn't have a ton of carries in this one, but the receiving touchdown, which is a good sign for Rojo, was good because we joked around and poked at him in the past about his hands and not being able to catch the ball. So having a big receiving touchdown, finding the end zone, that's a good sign for him. He did 2 weeks ago have 2.4 though, so it's a little shaky with maybe the volume for Ronald Jones. I don't think Leonard Fournette right now is a guy that you really have to worry about. Hasn't really been involved as much as we'd like. He used to be involved more in the passing game and not as much in recent times. So if you're a Ronald Jones manager, I don't think you're too worried about Leonard Fournette. I think the only time you'd be worried is if Rojo fumbles the ball, and we know what happens when he does something like that. Looks like Mike Evans is a go in this game. He was questionable, missed some time at practice this week. Evans and Godwin both had 15 plus the last 3 weeks of football, so that's been great. I think early on in the season here, we thought Mike Evans was just a touchdown dependent guy, which was the case in some of the games, but his volume has been very good for fantasy. So I think both him and Godwin should be expected to see a lot of targets in this game. Antonio Brown, 13 plus in 2 out of his 3 last games. Looking at the target share between the 3 over 3 games, we have Mike Evans leading the 3 with 29 targets, Chris Godwin 25, and Antonio Brown 24. So that's a lot of targets for 3 wide receivers. So what that tells me is if you have one of these guys, I think depending on your roster, you're going to play all 3. I think Antonio Brown might be pushing it a little bit because we've seen some games where he wasn't as involved as Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. But I think he could be a good flex play in this game against the Vikings defense that isn't great against the pass. And I think Chris Godwin, Mike Evans are almost automatically a wide receiver start for you just because of what they've done in recent times and the amount of volume that they're getting in these games. I'm fading Rudolph in this game, even with Irv Smith out. he's not getting what you want from him, not having to share that tight end position and the targets there. Gronk's had 16 targets in the last 3 as well. So if you're looking at a team that has so many people that you can plug in, I think the Buccaneers weekly are that team. The tight end position, there's times where you got guys like Jonnu Smith, for instance, where he'll have a game where he has 6 targets, and then he'll have another one with 3. I think Gronkowski's been a guy who's gotten a decent consistency moving forward here with his target share. So I do think Gronk can be a good play depending on who else you have at the tight end position, just because he's seen a lot of the ball, even with Antonio Brown being factored into this offense. Next game on the slot, Chiefs versus Dolphins. So CEH burned a lot of people in the last game because they said he was active, but he really wasn't. He didn't take a snap in this game. He didn't play versus Denver. Lev Bell got the bulk of the carries, which wasn't a ton in this game, but he's been iffy. Hasn't really done too much to make you optimistic for him. Even as a handcuff, I think. I mean, he's not important to this team like some running backs are to their team. So when you look at the Chiefs, you got so many options to push the ball forward. I don't think the running back in terms of Le'Veon Bell is really important to this offense. So even if in a world where Clyde Edwards-Helaire is out, I think Lev Bell is kind of an iffy play. I think CEH is a flex. He's averaging 13.9 in the year. I don't think he's scoring at 30-point weeks consistently or anything like that, but I think you have to flex him at least, even against the Dolphins, who are pretty decent at controlling the run. They're probably middle apart for that. Other side of the ball with the running back, Myles Gaskin, 23 touches last game. 5 out of his past 8 games, he's had 20 touches. He's averaging 14.1 points per game. So I think Myles Gaskin, unless you're playing like the Steelers or something like that, I think Myles Gaskin is a weekly play. The volume is there for him. We talked about James Robinson before and how many touches he get. Gaskin's going to be the same. There's not a lot of competition in that backfield. A lot of guys are banged up. I know a lot of people were pounding the Salvon Ahmed role in that offense, but I don't think it's a thing, even when he comes back for health. But Gaskin, with that amount of touches, 20-plus touches in so many games, I think he's an automatic play, and I think he can do well against this Chiefs team. I think that he's going to get a decent amount of carries. He might be involved in the passing game. Just count on him touching the ball a lot. And in fantasy, if somebody touches the ball a lot for a running back position, it's almost an automatic play unless the offense is in some sort of shambles. Looking forward here, quarterbacks. Don't have to talk too much about Mahomes. He's pretty good at football. Tua threw for 296 and a touchdown last week for Cincinnati, but only has 16.14. So I think Tua's ceiling is limited. Obviously, everybody gets a bump, in my opinion, if Fitz is under center, but we don't have control of that for fantasy or for real life. Tua, his scoring's been 5.72, 21.42, 14.66, 7.32, and then, like I said, just over 16 last game. So Tua's ceiling's a little bit limited. I think guys like Devontae Parker, Mike Gesicki are probably better off with Fitzpatrick, but Mike Gesicki's been the tight end 9 on the year, 11.5 and 23.8 the last 2 games. I think he's a good play in this game, especially with having to play Patrick Mahomes. I think having to play Patrick Mahomes, unless you catch an early lead, you're going to have to throw the ball. So I think Mike Gesicki shows some upside with his touchdown ability. He's coming off of 11 target games. So if Mike Gesicki is a tight end that you are debating on playing, I don't think there's much of a debate because of the volume right there. Again, we talk about some of the tight ends in the league, and their volume goes up and down like crazy. Mike Gesicki, 11 targets. That's a good sign. Plug him and play him. Chiefs actually give up 13 points per game to the tight end position. So seeing that Mike Gesicki is a top 10 tight end, Chiefs give up 13-ish points a game. I think there's some optimism there, and I think there's a lot of pros to playing Mike Gesicki this week. Pass catchers for the Chiefs. Tyreek Hill's good at football. Kelsey is good at football. Mecole Hardman had 3 targets last game. Watkins had 6. Watkins back-to-back 7-ish games in terms of points. Mecole has had 4 straight games under 8 points. So for me, I'm not taking a chance on either one of them. Even if you're chasing a game here, I mean, who's to say that Demarcus Robinson is not the guy that, pops up as a third option in this offense? We really just can't trust Mecole Hardman and Sammy Watkins. Maybe it's a personal preference, but I'm not rolling that dice and I'm not throwing that dart. Broncos and Panthers. CMC. Um, and my guy, all right, my guy John here. What's good? Nick Gesicki is a guy I loved coming into this year. Tua and he are starting to click. I do agree with that. And like I said before, 11 targets with Tua, I think it's a good sign because you get these young quarterbacks in the league. Not everybody sinks the same way as they did with the previous quarterback. You can't count on Mike Gesicki being hot with Tua just because he was with Fitz. So I like that as well. That's a good point, John. John's a great guy, great content. Thanks for the comment there. That's a good point. CMC games played 28.5, 24.8, 37.1. He's not playing again. And it sucks. I know it does suck for fantasy managers. I myself was banking on him playing in one of my dynasty leagues. I just missed out on a first round bye. I'm kind of chasing this matchup right now. I really thought CMC was going to play. This same league, I'm missing DJ Moore. You know, Mike Evans was banged up. I'm glad he's playing. DeAndre Swift was a big question mark. I think he's playing too. But not having CMC first round of playoffs for the guys that have made it so far without CMC, it's been a disappointment. It might be the biggest disappointment of fantasy. I think I throw it up there with Kenny Galladay too. We don't rank them the same. They're not in the same sort of tier in fantasy, but I think they've both been disappointments. Looking forward here, I love Jerry Jeudy. He's just not really involved, and he's mad at his involvement. I think that a report came out and said that he has been disappointed. The guy who has been involved is Tim Patrick, and I think he's a good flex this week with some upside. He had 20.4 last week, had a dud the week before, but he's had 14 plus in 5 games this year, and he's had 2 games at 20 plus. So looking at, hey, I have a couple guys I'm juggling for a flex position. The Panthers don't provide this stellar defense, so I think Tim Patrick being on a hot streak coming off a 20.4 week where he had some good volume, I think Tim Patrick's a great flex play, and I think he's still slept on because if you look at ESPN percent rostered, Tim Patrick's still floating around like 50% or less. Last time I checked, he was on my waiver article again. It seems like every week I'm throwing his name in there because he's not really respected for some reason, but 5 games at 14 plus, 2 games at 20 plus. I don't see why he's not a flex. I know Drew Lock is a little bit iffy at times as a quarterback, but you see a guy doing that sort of production, you got to love that. 15.2 last week versus Kansas City for Melvin Gordon and 3.1 against the Saints, which you take with a grain of salt just because the Saints defense against the run is phenomenal. Panthers are a bottom tier team for run defense. I think this could be a good Melvin Gordon week. I'm not a big Melvin Gordon fan, but if you look at matchups, if you look at some recency bias, 15.2 last week, I think he can be around that range in this game against the Panthers, who rank low. DJ Moore is out. Curtis Samuel, I think, may not be. I'm wondering if Ian Thomas gets a bump, in this offense. I'm not saying he's a guy that you should throw in and take a chance on for the tight end position, but maybe if you're in a 2 tight end league and you're really struggling for that position, maybe he gets a bump just because some guys are out. But the tight end to talk about is Noah Fant, had 7 targets last game, 2 the game before. Up and down volume, which we don't like to see. So again, I keep talking about the same sort of topics here, but looking at the tight end position, you want your tight end to have consistent volume, which is kind of hard in fantasy this year unless you have one of the better guys. Not everybody can have a Travis Kelce. Not everybody can have a Darren Waller. So looking for the next tier of guys, TJ Hockenson for me is right up there. And then there's probably another teardrop in Noah Fant. If he's getting 7 targets, you like it. If he's getting 2, you're scared. Some games he's had 3, and some games he's had up to 10. So you're hoping that in this game with Drew Lock, hopefully back to normal, back to health. He's been a little bit iffy, but you're hoping that he gives Noah Fant some targets in this game coming up. Next game on the slot, Texans Bears, and I think the news dropped earlier that David Johnson's on the COVID IR. So that was a big jab for him just coming back, and now he's out again. Chicago Bears fan, myself, not sure I like this matchup though. It's been a little bit disappointing, especially losing to the Tigers. Geez, wrong Detroit. Losing to the Lions last week, I had to make an apology to Chris Robin about that. We had a bet. Had to make an apology, and I think if I was betting somebody else, I'd be a little bit iffy about this game against the Texans. Houston's defense, though, is one of the worst at stopping the run. David Montgomery. David Montgomery's been good as of late. He may be my start of the week for the running back position. 25.3 and 27.1 the last 2 games. That's awesome. He's got to be one of the top running backs across those 2 weeks. 103 yards and 72 yards rushing, 9 catches across 2 games. So one of the things that was talked about a lot going into the season is, hey, the ceiling's limited for David Montgomery because of Tariq Cohen. Well, Tariq Cohen tears his ACL, and things did change for David Montgomery in terms of catching passes out of the backfield. So seeing 9 catches across 2 games, that's a good sign. Seeing 25-plus points across 2 games each for David Montgomery, that's phenomenal. That's good. It's good. So I think he's one of the starts of the week against this Houston defense. That's one of the worst at stopping the run. Automatic play for me. Chicago, on the other hand, allows 100 yards rushing per game, around that. David Johnson's out. I don't know if you can count on Duke Johnson to really step it up. Coach Cornell hinted at an expanded role for David Johnson. Now he's out. What does that mean for the next guys in the line? I really don't know. It might be Deshaun Watson being the leader in rushing in this game. Allen Robinson, the last couple of games, he's not been the guy that you really wanted him to be. 15.1, 10.3, 27.4. Allen Robinson, 13.5. So seeing most of those games under like 16 points, it's not really what you want from Allen Robinson. He did have that 27.4 game. I think he really needs to be on key with Mitch Trubisky in this one. You want more out of Allen Robinson. He wants more in terms of money, in terms of involvement, and a lot of things. So hoping for the best out of Allen Robinson here. But as of late, he's been okay, which you don't like to see. Darnell Mooney, the rookie, under 9.5 the last 4 games. His targets are there, but we're waiting for a breakout. I think the closest we've seen to Darnell Mooney breaking out was week 8, 17.9 he had. So, in terms of him having this big game, I think the accuracy problems for both Nick Foles and Mitch Trubisky has been holding him back, because you see him burning some guys at times, but he's not catching the ball because the ball's not thrown to him. So Darnell Mooney's a risky play just because he's had one good week, and then the rest have been iffy, even with high target volume. The guy in the Bears I want to talk about a little bit here quickly is Cole Kmet. Thank God. Thank God. Jimmy Graham, I said from the start, I said, you know what? It's a good signing. I said it after Cole Kmet got drafted, though. When he first got signed to the Bears, Jimmy Graham, I was not super happy because you get this older guy coming in. He did have some good games this year, but I'm like, why? Why are the Bears doing this? But it makes a little bit of sense when you got this young rookie tight end in Cole Kmet out of Notre Dame. Now he's got a mentor. And now last week he's on the field, and Jimmy Graham's really not on the field as much. I agree, John. I'm hoping it's Cole Kmet season. I'm a Notre Dame fan, so I got a bias. I'm a Chicago Bears fan, so I have even more bias. I'm hoping Cole Kmet is a thing. And I think if he continues to be involved in this offense, dynasty-wise, you might have to give him a bump up. He had 5 catches last week on 7 targets. 7 targets. We talk about targets with tight ends. Very good right there. And a touchdown last week. So I'm hoping that, Matt Nagy said earlier in the season, Cole Kmet needs to be involved in this offense, then do it. And do it. Last week he did it. A couple of weeks before he did not. So I'm hoping Cole Kmet is a consistent part of this offense. And if that's the case, he's a good tight end to pick up. Maybe you don't plug him in right away, but if he has 2 weeks like this where he's having 5, 6, 7 targets and he's getting some yardage on the field, I think he's a good guy to have on your team. Brandon Cooks was hot weeks 5 and 6. He had 30.1 and 21.8. Week 9, he had 17.3, but the last 4 games have just been okay for Brandon Cooks. He's been under 14 for the most part across weeks 11 through 13. He had 8 targets last game. I think he's going to have a lot of targets with Will Fuller out for the suspension, which kind of shook a lot of people that he wasn't hurt, and that's the reason he was out. No, he was suspended. Kiki Kuti, though, had 22.1 points last game, and he paced all the wide receivers, all the pass catchers, in almost all the categories. I think all the categories. So receptions, targets, yards, all that. He could be a flex with upside. The only concerning thing about Kiki Kuti is that Chad Hansen came out of nowhere and was 3rd in snaps, and he was involved in this offense. So you're hoping that Kiki Kuti, coming off a good game, is going to see more snaps than Chad Hansen, who came out of nowhere. But yeah, so I think Brandon Cooks is a guy you're going to play, obviously. Maybe he's more of a flex, though. The Bears are not a walkthrough team. Brandon Cooks has been a bit banged up with a foot and a neck issue, but we've seen some great games out of him. Says Duckies, but I know that man is John. Appreciate it, John. Cardinals, Giants. Kyler is the QB2. The last 3 games, 20.26, 7.9, and 16.42. You look at the matchup and you say, hey, I don't think the Giants are that good at football. But their defense actually has been pretty decent this year. So Kyler Murray on one end really needs to step up his game. He's QB2 because he's had some phenomenal games this year. The last 3 games are not what you expect out of him. On the other hand, the Giants are not going to be the easiest matchup for him. D-Hop scored 10-ish 2 out of the last 3 games. So 10-ish points from D-Hop. Duckies is my business. Absolutely no idea why it pops up like that. Hey, I thought it was your nickname, John, for a second. I was just going to roll with it and call you Duckies for a week or two there. That is funny, though. 13 targets for D-Hop last game. So Hopkins, the volume's there, but man, 10-ish points 2 out of the last 3 games. You're talking about a stack. Kyler DeAndre Hopkins stack has been kind of iffy as of lately. So if you're the fantasy manager, you're hoping things kind of change, especially with the playoffs around the corner here. Chase Edmonds not getting the time that you really want from him if you were going to flex him or something like that. Drake's a must start in this one, though, especially with a lead. So if they get a lead in this game, I think Kenyon Drake's going to need a lot of touches here. 16, 24.3, and 13.8 the last 3 games. So outside of the 13.8, you're not going to really say that's a dud, but that 16 and 24.3 game out of Kenyon Drake's pretty good there. He had the Rams last game too, so you kind of factor that in, especially with what they can do to offensive weapons. So I think Kenyon Drake, Cardinals get a lead in this one. I think he's going to get a lot of touches. I think you're kind of fading Chase Edmonds just because he's not getting the field time he needs. And Chase Edmonds used to be the pass catcher, and it's not as consistent as it once was. The guy I want to talk about, though, in terms of running backs is Wayne Gallman. What a stud this guy has been. 16.4, 13.2, 14.7, 19, 18.1, and 13.5 as a starter. He's averaging a touchdown a game as a starter. Wayne Gallman's been on fire. I think he's a must play every week until he cools down. If a guy is that hot where he's consistently scoring that sort of point production, I think Wayne Gallman is an automatic start. 16 plus in 3 of those games right there. He's never been under 13 points. So you're looking for consistency. This man's killing it. I mean, you have to plug him in until he has a bad game. And I don't see a bad game in this one against the Cardinals. You're hoping Daniel Jones is a go in this one for guys like Sterling Shepard. I'm not a big Slayton guy because Darius Slayton, unless he gets that like one big play, he's not doing well for you in fantasy. And I think when guys are burning you more than they're helping you, unless your back's against the wall, I'm not a Slayton guy. I think Sterling Shepard, he's having like 8 targets for most of his games that he's involved with, sometimes higher, sometimes around that range. So if Daniel Jones plays, I think Sterling Shepard is a guy that you're going to want to play in this game. If it's Colt McCoy, it's a little bit of a tick down on Sterling Shepard here. But I think if you're looking for a pass catcher in terms of wide receivers, it's got to be Sterling Shepard. But you're hoping for Daniel Jones just for that bump in production there. But again, we look for volume. We look for targets. Sterling Shepard's a guy that gets that. You're just hoping he has his actual quarterback in this game. Evan Ingram, the last few games here, last 5, his targets look like this: 10, 10, 3, 9, 8. And he scored 12 plus in 3 out of the 5 last games. So I think he's an automatic start. But again, his ceiling might be a little bit lower if it's not with Daniel Jones here. So seeing a bunch of games with 10 targets and 9 and 8. He had one game with 3, which that's the asterisk in this 5-game stretch here. I think Evan Ingram's been good, but again, you want his actual quarterback to be playing in this one. Went old school here with the notes. I think sometimes it makes taking notes and getting ready for pods like this a little bit more interesting than just going straight pen to paper sometimes. So I actually printed these out, which is nice. Cowboys, Bengals. Zeke, the last 6 games. Let's look at the stats here. So if you're a Zeke manager, maybe you don't want to hear this, but 6.1, 8.3, 8.9, 19.3, that's Zeke. That's Zeke. Thank you. 2.9, not so much Zeke. 13.5, still not Zeke. So many bad games out of Zeke. You're hoping against the Cincinnati Bengals he's going to have somewhat of a game here. You think this will be the game that he's back at that 19-point game sort of output, but Zeke's been really bad. I don't think you ever sit Zeke, though. I hate to see when guys are saying, hey, I'm going with Ty Johnson this week instead of Zeke because Zeke's been bad. No, you got to play your studs, man. Does it burn you sometimes to play your studs? Sure. We've all been there. But at the same time, if you're going to sit Zeke for a Peyton Barber sort of guy or a Devontae Booker, I think you're putting yourself in a bad position because I'd rather get burned by Zeke than get burned by like Ty Johnson or Peyton Barber. 4 straight weeks under 10 points for Gio Bernard. He's had 2 catches and 4 catches in 2 games. So looking at 4 games total, you look at Gio Bernard, he's a guy that catches a lot of passes, hasn't really been catching that many passes. That's a little bit concerning. It's a good matchup for him against the Cowboys defense, which is weaker, but I'm not high end playing Gio Bernard. I know a lot of guys are because of the matchup, but 4 straight weeks under 10 points, maybe those games are harder than the Cowboys, but he's really got to step up in this one. He's not being involved the way you expect him to be involved, as well. The pass catchers for the Cowboys here are interesting. The last 3 games, here's the point productions. Amari Cooper, 53.6 points and 24 targets total. CeeDee Lamb, 34.3 points and 22 targets total. Michael Gallup, 36.6 and 24 targets total. Gallup's had 2 games under 11 points, though, so he did have 1 big game in that stretch. I think Amari Cooper is a guy you put in your wide receiver position. I think CeeDee Lamb, you're comfortable flexing CeeDee Lamb just because he's so talented and to be not the smartest thing to sit a guy that talented, especially against the Bengals. Michael Gallup's like a chasing a matchup sort of guy. So if you're chasing a matchup, you might plug in Michael Gallup into that flex position. Otherwise, you might look to somebody who might have more targets consistently because he's the 3rd option in this offense. Is he the 1st option sometimes? Sure, but not more than usual here. So again, I think Cooper is a guy you start. I think CD you flex, and I think Michael Gallup, it's team dependent on if you're playing him. T. Higgins, the other rookie in this matchup, 22.5, 5.6, 15.4. So 2 out of 3 matchups there were pretty good, and then 10.6. So the last 4 games, he's had a little bit of an up and down streak, but he's a wide receiver 28 on the year. Another talented guy that can make a big play. He was limited this week with a hamstring tweak, so make sure you're paying attention to the injury reports on that. Tyler Boyd's a guy I like a lot. Last game, he had 14.2, which looks okay, but he could have had a bigger week. He had 1 catch for 72 yards, and then he got in a fist fight with Xavier Howard or Woods, one of the 2. He got in a fist fight with somebody, which really wasn't even a fist fight. I think they pushed each other like 1 time, and they both got ejected. So Tyler Boyd across the last 4 games, 10.1, 17.5, 4.5, and then 14.2. So 3 games above 10, 2 games above 14. He had 1 dud of a game, but I think Tyler Boyd, again, is a guy that can handle the volume. If he's not ejected, I think he should be okay in this game. I think both him and T. Higgins are good plays. I know people are concerned about Brandon Allen. He's not the greatest quarterback in the world. He's not the most average quarterback in the world, but I think they are going to have to throw the ball. So T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd, I think, are still guys that you can at least minimal flex. Cowboys are among the worst defense in coverage. So, with that point being there, I think Dalton on the other side of the ball might have to play some catch up if Brandon Allen can connect to these 2 wide receivers. Dalton's projected 14.4. The last 3 games, 19.32, 12.3, and 17.6. So can Dalton be a decent play this week against the Bengals? He might be. The talent's there for him to throw to. Can he be consistent? I don't know. It's a good matchup if you're really, really in a stretch for maybe a super flex sort of league. Colts and Raiders. This is a 3:00 game Central Time for me. Looking at the quarterbacks here, Phillip Rivers, 21.42, 17.8, and 19.2 the last 3. Phillip Rivers has been pretty good in fantasy. Not a lot of people like to admit that and acknowledge it, but he's actually been pretty good. And I think the matchup against the Raiders might be another week where he can be in that like 19-point range, which wouldn't really kill you if you got a guy that's in a bad matchup. Derek Carr, on the other hand, 31.74 last game. he was probably the best quarterback last week, if not a top 2, 3 guy. But the Colts are among one of the best pass defenses. We've seen some good games out of Derek Carr this year. We've seen some games where, he's had 19-ish points around that range. His ceiling is not as low as people think it is, but at the same time, we've seen some real duds out of him. I think 2 games ago, he had a great matchup against the Atlanta Falcons. You thought Derek Carr is a must-start guy, had a bad game. Against the Colts, I don't think I'm comfortable plugging in Carr. I think if I had to pick between the two, it's Philip Rivers, just because he's been more consistent and he's been pretty decent in fantasy here. Darren Waller is a tight end too. We don't have to tell you to start him. I think he's a must start against anybody. He had that 45-point game last week with 13 on 17 targets. Crazy. He had 200 yards in that game. Devontae Booker is an interesting one. 16 for 50, had 1 catch for 1 yard last week. He had 6.1 points against the Jets. So, a lot of people will rush to the waiver wire to pick him up. He had a bad game against the Jets. The Jets aren't like a walkover team always on defense, but at the same time, you expect the running back to usually have a good week against the Jets. Devontae Booker, a couple weeks back, had a good game where he had the 2 touchdowns. But last week's not super promising. You look at the matchup against the Colts. They're a solid defense. Are they going to shut him down? He's not playing the Jets this week. Maybe, but I guess you can count on volume for the guy. And we have a question here. If Brissett gets touchdown, Rivers gets the points. Team QB. If you play in a team QB league, that's interesting. I have never played in one of those, but I guess your team, whoever scores. So that's a interesting thing to look forward to there. Juicy matchup for Jonathan Taylor. 13 for 91, 3 catches for 44, and a touchdown last game. Receiving touchdown for Taylor is a good thing to see. You think of Nyheim Hines as a pass catcher, but to see Taylor have a receiving touchdown is a good sign. He's had 2 good games, 22.5 last game. The game before he had COVID, or he was in close contact and COVID, he had 15.4. So I think Jonathan Taylor is finally released. I think you don't have to worry about Wilkins as much as you once did. I think this is a great matchup for him. I think he's an automatic start this week. He can be a great play. Hines is a flex, 17.5 and 12.2 the last 2 games. I think he's a risky flex, though, just because Jonathan Taylor's workload is increasing. Hines has had so many weak games this year. I think not enough is talked about with that. He's had some great games where you're like, man, Hines is just this phenomenal PPR machine. And then you have games where he's under like 6 points, 7 points. So I think you got to be careful sometimes with Hines. I think the matchup's fine here. You can flex him. If you're starting Hines at a running back position, I might look elsewhere, especially with some guys that are going to have more guaranteed touches. Hilton's been hot, 18.1 and 25 the last 2 games. We thought he retired from fantasy. I think the fantasy footballers talked about that and retired him for him. Ruggs had 15.4 last game, just talking about the pass catchers here. Pittman had 19.2 and 15.6 in weeks 10 and 11. Aguilar just had 20.8 in week 11. Could we trust any of these guys? So that's a big question mark here. For me, a lot of people are high on Hilton because of the recent production. But at the same time, how many times this season has Hilton burned you for playing him? I have trust issues with T.Y. Hilton. He's on a hot streak. So if you want to ride a hot hand, power to you. I'm more so leaning towards Pittman if I got to pick one of the two, just because I think Pittman, his involvement's been good. Maybe the target share is not what you want it to be on a weekly basis, but I think athletically, I think just this young guy going after it, I think I'm going to go Pittman over Hilton in this one, even with Hilton having 2 great games in a row. I just have this distrust for T.Y. Hilton. I think Ruggs having that 15.4 game last week was great for him. He's another guy I don't really trust, though, just because he hasn't had a lot of good weeks. I think his involvement's been increasing. He had, I think 2 weeks ago, 5 targets. Just missed a touchdown last week. He had that big touchdown. But Aguilar, I think if I had to pick between the two, is going to be the guy I would trust more. But I don't know if I want to play either one of these guys. And I think all 4 are iffy. You might say, hey, the Colts against the Raiders, one of those two Colts wide receivers might be all right in this one. And we got Chris Gold 2525 Acres and Rams D got me 40 plus D32. Let's fucking go. I'm out. I know what they had. Stay away. Ruggs is a no. I agree with Ruggs. I'm not a big Ruggs guy. I think it was a mistake drafting him where they drafted him, but that's another debate for another time. Jets versus Seahawks. I think Ty Johnson's a streamer if Gore is 100% out. I think he's out with a concussion, but 22 for 104 last game and a touchdown. He's an explosive guy. I don't think he's used to that amount of touches. I think he's usually like a change of pace, speedy back. He had 2 catches, though, for 13 as well, so he can catch the ball, and he was involved in that. He had 19.7 last week. So if Gore is for sure out, someone can correct me who's watching. That's fine. But if Ty Johnson is the lead back in this game, I think he's a streamable flex. I think if you're in a pinch in your fantasy playoff matchup here, Ty Johnson, I think he can be a streamable guy. But we've been burned before. I mean, look at Devontae Booker last week. You know, he got the role, great matchup, and then he burned us. I think I'm getting confirmation from my buddy John. Gore will play. So if Gore's playing, I think I don't know if I'm trusting Ty Johnson just because Adam Gase looks at Gore the way that most of us look at our spouses, or that we Gase expects him to. Gase looks at Gore the way that we should be looking at our spouses. So I think if Gore is playing, Ty Johnson maybe he's not the streamable guy you think he should be. Crowder last game had 2 touchdowns, which is great because Jameson Crowder. I think, you know, Mims has had this bump. Mims is out for the personal reasons, but Mims has had a bump. You know, Perryman has some big playability. Crowder used to have like 13 targets, you know, for so many straight weeks, something like that, just because he was one of the only guys. So seeing him have 2 touchdowns last game gives you some optimism for him. I think Perryman gets a bump with Mims out because Mims has been getting some good targets in this offense. So I think Perryman, he does have that big playability. So if Darnold does connect to him downfield against the Seahawks, who do allow wide receivers some good games, I think Perryman could be a guy that you can flex this week. Russ has been QB4 for the year, 14 and 15 points the last 2 games. So Russell Wilson has not been the QB he's been as of earlier in the season. I think it's a good matchup for him to be good. You know, DK Metcalf, obviously wide receiver 3 against one of the worst passing defenses, is mouthwatering for fantasy managers. Lockett has been one of the biggest boom or bust guys in fantasy. He might be the biggest of the season. You know, he'd have weeks of 37 and 53, and then he'd have weeks of like 5.9. I wrote down and 5.3. So he's the wide receiver 8, which is scary because he can have these crazy games, and then he can have games where he is terrible. So Lockett's been a guy that I think I have 1 share of in a league, but man, you really just can't count on him, even in a juicy matchup. I think you have to play him, though, just because, you know, if he scores you like 30 points, he probably can win you a matchup. If he doesn't, you're hoping that somebody else can pick up the slack in this one. Chris Carson coming off a 20-point week. Big upside for touchdowns there. Could be a top play, pending that, you know, all is good in Chris Carson land there. Packers versus Lions. So 2 teams that I don't like. Obviously, because I'm a Bears fan. But T.J. Hawkinson and Robert Tonyan, they're the tight end 3 and the tight end 4. And it's a good matchup for both of them, I think. I think both guys, if you have them, could be your plugs of the week here. I think both guys have the ability to have good games on a weekly basis. I think T.J. Hawkinson, you know, Kenny Golladay, a guy who's been very disappointing in fantasy just because he's been out with that hip injury this whole season pretty much. T.J. Hawkinson's been a good guy to get some volume and have some good fantasy weeks. He can find the end zone. Matt Stafford looks for him. He's been a great tight end, I think. Looking at who's healthy, I think he's the tight end 3, and I think he is the tight end 3 with Kittle being out. You know, you look at Travis Kelce as the obvious number 1, Darren Waller is number 2, and T.J. Hawkinson is number 3, and I think that makes complete sense, and I think he's a consistent tight end. I don't think he has the Kelce and Waller upside on a weekly basis, but I think he's consistent. Tonyan, Aaron Rodgers likes this guy, and the thing about Tonyan is when he gets volume, he like catches everything. So if he gets 4 targets, he catches 4 balls. You know, Aaron Rodgers is good at finding guys where they need to catch the ball. I think he trusts Tunyon. Tunyon's the tight end 4 because he's had some big games because he finds the end zone. So I think, again, if you're looking for a guy who's going to have some upside, I think Tunyon is a guy who's shown to be that. Devontae Adams, looking at the pass catchers, obviously I don't have to analyze Devontae Adams, but he has the highest average points a game right now, if we're not counting McCaffrey, who's played, only a handful of games. So Devontae Adams averages 26.3. Week 7 through 9, he had 44.6, 30.3, 33.3. He has scored every game, 7 straight games in a row, with multiple in a few. So obviously I'm not analyzing Devontae Adams being good at football. What I am going to say, though, is if we look at the fantasy playoffs here, if I'm playing somebody and I'm scared to play somebody, I think Devontae Adams might be number 1 on my list. Because we've seen some iffy games out of a lot of guys in fantasy, but Devontae Adams, man, he can pop off for 40 and really just ruin a matchup for you. So I think against the Lions, I'm playing him in one matchup, first round of the playoffs, and I'm not excited about it. Green Bay is one of the worst run defenses in the league. Monty, we talked about David Montgomery earlier. He saw some success against them. Hoping DeAndre Swift can play in this one, or else Adrian Peterson. He's coming off of a handful of touchdowns in the last couple of games. I think Peterson might be a guy you can flex just because he's finding the end zone. I don't think he's going to give you 120-yard week or anything like that, but I'm hoping, as one of the biggest DeAndre Swift truthers on fantasy Twitter, that DeAndre Swift can play. I have him in every single league almost. He's such a talented guy. For me, he was the RB1 coming out of this draft. He's had so many good weeks. I'm hoping that he's back to normal, and I think, you might be a little nervous if he is expected to suit up, that, he doesn't get the bulk of carries that he was getting before he had that concussion. But Green Bay is such a juicy game to have a good rushing week. So I'm hoping DeAndre Swift is playing in this one. Aaron Jones, you like. Obviously, weeks 10 and 11, he had 13 and 10 carries. Jamal Williams was getting way too many touches. I don't know if that was because Aaron Jones was still a bit banged up in that. But weeks 12 and 13, he had 17 and 15 carries. So what that tells me is he's inching away from Jamal Williams. I don't think you have to be as worried about the involvement of some sort of committee like you did for 2 weeks when maybe he was probably just getting back from injury. But Aaron Jones, obviously a great play on a weekly basis, but seeing the touches get back to normal is a good sign for fantasy here. Got the Falcons and Chargers next on the slot here. Falcons are actually good versus the run, but not so hot versus the pass, opening up a bounce-back game for Eckler. Austin Eckler, who had 10.8 last week, 2 weeks ago, he had 23.9. So if the Falcons are decent against the run, I still think that Eckler can have a very good game because we've seen him get targeted so much from Justin Herbert that I think he can be phenomenal in this one. Hot take, Justin Herbert is the QB1 this week. Letting that sink in for a second. I actually have him not as my start of the week. I think I'm going to have a different guy as my start of the week. But my hot take is Justin Herbert finishes QB1 of this week. He had a terrible game last week. I think he's due for a bounce back. The great thing about Herbert is he is the QB8 and he missed a game. So if you look at guys who started every single game, the fact that he is the QB8 is insane. He's had 6 games over 300-plus yards thrown. So the volume obviously is crazy. Keenan Allen is the wide receiver 4. Keenan Allen's only had 3 games under 10 targets. He's had 7 games above 10 targets. That's insane to me. I think he's another guy that on a weekly basis, if you're playing Keenan Allen and Justin Herbert's got a good matchup, that's not something you look forward to. I think Julio's out in this one, so he is out, pretty sure. So the bump is not to Hayden Hurst. Hayden Hurst, not a guy I've been a fan of, never was. Great person off the field. He does a lot of things for mental health. Love Hayden Hurst for that. The guy that gets a bump, though, is Russell Gage. He had 15.1 last week. He's had 25 targets the last 3 games. So Russell Gage started off, weeks 1 and 2 very hot in fantasy. Last year he had some great games as well. 15.1 last week. I think against the Chargers here, he's going to get some good volume. Zacchaeus, I think, I could be saying that wrong. The other wide receiver, he's had some decent games as well. But I think Russell Gage is getting back into the flow of, hey, Matt Ryan's giving me the ball. I don't think Hayden Hurst gets a huge bump. I think Gage is the one that gets the bump with Julio being out. Calvin Ridley's been great in fantasy, so you're hoping that he has a great game. The Chargers secondary is pretty good though, but Ridley's had 14 plus the last three. He's had 9, 9, and 10 targets the last 3 games. I expect Calvin Ridley to have 10 or more targets in this one. But again, Chargers secondary is actually pretty solid, but I don't think that takes away too much from what Calvin Ridley can do. Chargers defense gives up the 11th most fantasy points per game to the running back position. Who's the running back in the Falcons? Todd Gurley. So everybody's fading Gurley. I don't know if I'm 100% fading Gurley in this one. You know, he doesn't have like the passing game included too much with him. He's been very touchdown dependent. But with Chargers defense giving up the 11th most fantasy points per game, you know, 11 is not like 1 or 2 or 3, but I mean, it's inching towards higher than the middle of the park. I think people fading Gurley completely and saying he can't even be flexed, I think that's a little bit harsh for what he's been able to do. You know, if his knee's not flared up, if he's good to go, I don't think he's a terrible play in this one. And I know a lot of people have been fading him. Falcons allow the 5th most fantasy points to the tight end position. Hunter Henry is a tight end 7 right now. Do the math there. So I'll read that one again. Falcons allow the 5th most fantasy points to the tight end position. Hunter Henry is the tight end 7. I said earlier, Justin Herbert might be the QB1 this week. Add everything together. I think Hunter Henry is going to be a top 3 play, maybe top 5 at the least this week. If I get burned on that, call me out on Twitter for it. But I think Hunter Henry is an automatic play this week, especially against a team that's not good against the tight end position. Washington versus the 49ers. So Gibson, I think, is trending to not being active. McKissick, if he is the back without a Gibson in this offense, he's a good flex play. He's got high upside, 10 catches last game. He had 9 in 7 weeks, 9 and 10. So looking at the guy for PPR leagues who catches that many passes, McKissick has great upside. He's had 17-ish points, 3 out of the 5 last games. So in a 5-game stretch there, McKissick has not been great. But if 3 games he's had 17-ish points, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. I think McKissick's an automatic play if Gibson's not around. So any week that Antonio Gibson is not in this offense, I mean, Peyton Barber might be involved and, you know, rush the ball. Maybe Peyton Barber gets 15 carries, whatever the case is. We look for PPR purposes at pass catching running back. So McKissick having that upside, automatic play. Mostert on the other side had 5.3 last game. He had 10.3 the game before. He's splitting time with Jeff Wilson right now, and I'm not sure if it's just like a ease him back into the offense sort of thing or what the case is, but if he continues to split time with Jeff Wilson in this one, Washington is one of the toughest matchup for running backs. So it's not looking good for Mostert if that's the case. So if you're playing Mostert, you're hoping that he's pushing Jeff Wilson and saying, go back to the bench, buddy, I got this. Because of the rushing D for the Washington here, it's pretty good. So I don't know if Mostert's got the higher ceiling that, you know, we're used to with him. Logan Thomas, 13.42 and 24.8 the last 2 games. He's been a tight end 3 across those 2 games, 4 and 9 targets. So the efficiency is there. We talked about Tunyon having some good efficiency with his targets. Logan Thomas, it's been great. 4 targets, 4 catches. And then last week, 9 targets. And how many catches? 9. So he's 100% the last 2 weeks with his targets and his catches. That's awesome. I think Logan Thomas is a guy, rest of the season, you're looking to play. Just because Alex Smith is connected to him, you're hoping, you know, maybe you can't depend on him getting 9 targets every single week. But if he gets 5 and he catches all 5, or if he gets 6 and he catches all 6, he's got some good upside there. So I think Logan Thomas is a good play, and I think he's a good play in this one. Jordan Reed I liked, but the 4 targets last game is not promising with other options. The touchdown saved him last week. I think he might be a little bit more dependent now on touchdowns with the wide receiver volume for Ayuk and Debo. Talking about those guys, Ayuk is coming off of a 20.5 point game, Debo 13-ish game, with both having 9 targets. So both of those guys, Mullen said, hey, listen, guys, 9 and 9. That's how it's going to be. So they both were good fantasy plays, and they both had 9 targets. So 9 targets, good. 13 plus, good. 20 plus, good. Tougher matchup though against Washington. So the upside might be a little bit more limited because this defense is not a joke. The defense is not a joke. I think both are flex plays. I think both are flex plays for the week. I think Ayuk, I was lower on than most people. I think I was actually wrong about Ayuk. But if he's getting this volume and the tight end position is not being targeted like it usually is with Kittle, I think they have some good upside there. Last game we'll talk about here: Saints versus Eagles. Miles Sanders. Oh, a lot of people are benching Miles Sanders. And again, I think it depends on your team makeup. I mean, are you really going to bench Miles Sanders for Peyton Barber this week? I mean, again, I really in fantasy would rather get burned by a stud than a guy who's average. I might be in the minority saying, like, if you're really going to start a questionable guy like again, Devontae Booker, are you really going to start him over Miles Sanders? Maybe the matchup's a little bit different. Saints defense obviously is terrible for running backs, opposing running backs. 16 carries the last 2 games, which is bad for Miles Sanders combined. So 16 carries across the last 2 games combined. He's had 2 catches total for those games. He's had under 10 points the last 3 weeks. Saints D, again, great against the run. Not a lot of room to be optimistic for Miles Sanders. The only thing that you would hope for is, hey, Doug Peterson knows he's got this young sophomore running back, and he says, hey, we got to get this guy more involved. We got to get his spirits lifted, because if I was Miles Sanders, I wouldn't be super happy right now. I'd be walking into the locker room with my head down. But man, you just have to hope that they give him more volume, because they are not gonna they're not gonna do well not being able to establish the run in this one. And the run might come from Jalen Hurts, unfortunately. He's drawn the start. Jalen Hurts is a guy I loved in college. I love his work ethic. He reminds me very, very different. But like Kobe's like Mamba mentality of like putting in the work and like hitting the weight room after a game and like spending the hours. I think of Jalen Hurts that way, and he is nowhere near that tier of person. I just love the work ethic for Jalen Hurts and the determination to be good. It's going to be tough in this one against the Saints. I think with Jalen Hurts being mobile, my biggest question of the week was, does that maybe help Miles Sanders? If the quarterback is mobile, does it keep the defense honest? Like maybe like if they're worried about him rushing the ball, he can pitch it to Miles Sanders and get him involved, or he's going on the run and then he tosses it to Miles Sanders. Maybe, I mean, we're taking like optimistic looks here now, but yeah, I think looking at some of the other people involved in this game, Goddard's been solid: 18.7, 20.5, and 11.6 the last 3 games. Tight end targets 6, 10, and 7. Good target share for Dallas Goedert. Ertz, on the other hand, I think is still kind of getting eased into the offense. I think he's not somebody you're super optimistic about playing. I think he's a guy that probably should be faded, actually. Taysom Hill's been good in fantasy: 24.22, 17.52, 23.58. Only needed 9 completions in the middle of this 3-game stretch to be successful. Michael Thomas went 19.4, 9.1, and 19.5 the last 3. He's had 12, 6, and 11 targets. So that middle game where they didn't have to throw the ball out, you're hoping that's not the case. Talked about Robert Woods at the start of this podcast and how I was disappointed in his output last game, but Jared Goff didn't throw the ball out. So that hinders what his production can be. Hopefully, if you're a Michael Thomas manager, you're hoping that the Saints don't roll over the Eagles, because if that's the case, Taysom Hill's probably not going to throw the ball out, and that doesn't mean a lot of targets for Michael Thomas. So hoping that the Saints versus Eagles is an actual football game here. You should, see Michael Thomas get somewhere between that 10 to 12 target range, hopefully. Kamara, on the other hand, he had 17.7 last game. He's had 2 weeks, though, before 10.5 or less. He's had 3 catches in the last 3 games. So Taysom Hill's under center. You're not optimistic about Kamara getting passes thrown his way. Drew Brees, automatic. Kamara can have 10 catches in a game or something like that. He'd be like the J.D. McKissick of the team. But with Taysom Hill, it's not his style of play. I don't know if it's a thing he struggles with. I don't know if he's looking down the field and he just doesn't see the third option being Kamara or what the case is. But Kamara's ceiling is limited with Taysom Hill, and that's a fact. So 17.7 last game. That's what you're looking for out of Alvin Kamara, but the pass catching's not there. So limited ceiling with Taysom Hill. You're hoping if you're playing him this week and you're in the fantasy playoffs that you may get to week 15 so that hopefully Drew Brees is back from those rib injuries and he can throw the ball to Alvin Kamara. The night game, Steelers versus Bills. Not going to get too much into that. And then on Monday, you have the Ravens versus Browns. So two great games. I think both will be exciting games there. But yeah, so if anybody has any starter sits, feel free to tag me on Twitter. Ask me that. This will be on iTunes. If you're just catching this stream now, I'm going to put it on iTunes tonight so you can catch it later on, or you can catch it in the morning. But for everybody who listened or is listening right now, good luck in your matchups, man. I really do hope that you guys are successful. It's been a long season with COVID and all these injuries. It's been such a terrible year for injuries. But if you made it this far in fantasy for the playoffs, that's awesome. That's awesome. It's a lot of credit. It's a grind. It's a grind. So thanks, guys, for listening. Again, Nick from P2W Fantasy. I will have this out on iTunes for you guys to listen to if you miss this. So thanks for tuning in, guys. Have a great night.